Hi everyone, my name is Antoine, I'm French, and it is a pleasure to meet you. I love money. I love to have it, I love to spend it, and sometimes I just spread it on my bed, lay on it, and pretend I'm a dragon. And when I tried to look for the man with the most money ever, for inspiration, I found this guy, Mansa Musa, apparently a former emperor of Mali. However, not that much seems to be known about him, and what I did find was closer to legends than reality. And so, and because clearly it's not like I can go on a hike with that fucking foot, I wanted to take a look at this Mansa Musa. His life, the sources we have on him, just how much money did he actually have, and also if he did anything in his life other than just being rich as fuck. Okay, so before talking about Musa becoming an emperor, I'm gonna give you guys some context about Mali itself. And because we don't have that many details about it, and because this is really not what this video is about, I'm going to rush it. Africa is a place, and some people live there. Okay, a few more details. Some of these people settle in the Niger River basin. They settle some small towns, they grow some crops, which attracts more and more people. These cities start trading with each other and with other people across the desert. And some of them gain in power, like Gao for example, becoming important city-states, trading hubs, and political powers. Thanks to desert trade and the Almoravid neighbors, Arabic writing and Islam spread a lot in the region, but it still cohabitates pretty well with traditional local beliefs. The slavery business explodes, both for exportation, but also for local consumption. They had pretty slave girls, with white complexions, good figures, firm breasts, slim waist, fat buttocks, wide shoulders and sexual organs so narrow that one of them may be enjoyed as though she were a virgin indefinitely. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ, why did I learn how to read? Some of these cities coalesce and form the Ghana Empire. This empire grows by conquering and submitting other cities, becoming extremely rich and prosperous in the process. Then they get into a fight with the Almoravids, leading to some war and some pillages. The empire then collapses, and many of its tributary city-states just break away and start forming their own kingdoms. One of them, the Kingdom of Soso, actually manages to conquer what was left of the Ghana Empire, but also to conquer the kingdoms of Mande, a region inhabited by the Mandinka people. A prince from that region, namely Sundiata Keita, then leads a rebellion against Soso and actually manages to unite all of the Mande kingdoms under his own rule. But not only does he manage to liberate all of the Mande, he actually captured all of the lands that Soso just conquered before. This war marks the birth of the Mali Empire, also known as the Manding Empire, depending on who you ask, which was then immortalized in the Epic of Sundiata, a very romanticized version of the events in which Sundiata somehow cuts a mountain in half and in which his mother had pubic hair as sharp as porcupine needles. And I'm pretty sure some of you actually want to read it now. Sundiata and his successors then expand the empire by conquering and submitting other kingdoms, and this is the empire that Mansa Musa will receive, the Empire of Mali, or Manding. The empire is large, spreading all the way from Savannah to Sahel and from Soso to the ocean. They are also extremely rich. They are at the very center of the Trans-Sahara trade. They have so many gold and salt mines, they can't even spend it all even if they tried. Islam has gained more and more influence in the elite class, but it still cohabitates very well with traditional local beliefs. The Malian Empire, at that point in time, was the greatest and most powerful empire that Africa had ever seen. And it just so happens to be ruled by a fucking weirdo. That emperor was Muhammad ibn Q, and he was convinced that there were undiscovered land on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and on top of that, he was also convinced that he could actually reach them. Told you, a fucking weirdo! And so he prepared 300 ships of men and 300 ships of gold and supplies, and he just sent them on their way. And after a long time without any news about them, only one ship came back, The captain of that ship explained that they met a gigantic and powerful current in the middle of the ocean that had just destroyed every other ship. But the emperor didn't believe him, and so he prepared another 2,000 ships, once again half filled with men, half filled with gold and supplies. But this time, he would actually embark with them. He just appointed a regent to take care of the empire while he was gone, and then he just sailed into the horizon with the boats, and once again, they would never return. Maybe they also died along the way, which is honestly the most likely outcome, or maybe they did manage to cross the ocean and to land into fucking Florida. I'll be honest, I'm not sure which one is worse. But what is actually interesting to us in this little story is that before embarking towards his most likely death, he actually appointed a regent to take care of the empire when he was gone. And that regent, ladies and gentlemen, was Mansa Musa. Yes! We did it! Context is over. We have finally reached the point in the video that is actually interesting to us. We have eaten all of the bland crust around the sandwich, we can get into the good stuff. Mansa Musa. Who was he? Well, first of all, Mansa isn't a name, it's a title, like king or emperor. His real name is usually referred to as Kankan Musa or Musa Keita, but we're just going to call him Musa today. He was the grandson of Sundiata Keita, the man who created the empire about 5 minutes ago. He arrived in power in 1312. Now we don't know his exact age at that point, but we do know that about 12 years later, he would be described as young and handsome, meaning that when he became Mansa about 12 years earlier, he would be even younger. Seeing someone that young on the throne is already a bit unexpected, but it becomes even more surprising when you realize that he was not in the direct line of succession, because he was from a different branch of the Sundiata family than Muhammad ibn Q. When it comes to his personality, he is usually described as just, very wealthy, yes, that is a personality trait, and extremely generous, often giving lavish gifts to friends, helpers, or just some random people he just met. He is also described as very pious and devoted to the Muslim faith, which wasn't exactly unheard of back then in Mali, but it still wasn't the case for most people. Islam's spread in West Africa was done in two ways, and the first one was commerce. Most of Mali's trade partners in the Sahara were Muslims, meaning that they followed Muslim trade customs and that they had access to Arabic writing. So for Malian merchants, converting to Islam made a lot of sense, because it would help them to commerce better with their Muslim trading partners. And since Mali's power mostly came from commerce and foreign trade, these newly Muslim merchants became more and more numerous and more powerful, meaning that Islam was very well represented at the higher echelon of Malian society. And the second way for Islam to get into Mali was diplomacy, because Mali's neighbors were not just trade partners, they were also neighbors. And following the same religion as your neighbors would open you a lot of doors with them. Especially if you were to try and conquer those neighbors and to legitimize yourself as their rightful emperor. Hypothetically. So Islam wasn't exactly a new thing in Mali, especially at the court. In fact, two of Musa's predecessors, Uli and Sakura, already went on the Hajj, the great Muslim pilgrimage. However, it is also clear that not everyone was a Muslim. A lot of people still followed just traditional local beliefs. And so the Mansas always had to tiptoe around the problem, trying to promote Islam, but without alienating about half the population. And the same thing went for Musa. However, and even compared to his predecessors, Musa was still known as extremely pious and religious, and he did a lot to help spread Islam. He financed a lot of Muslim scholars and artists, he built a lot of mosques. Some sources claim that he built a new mosque every Friday, but that's most likely an exaggeration. And like his predecessors, he went on the Hajj, the great pilgrimage to Mecca that every single Muslim must accomplish at least once in their lives. And he did it about 12 years after taking power. Why he took so long to go there, we are not exactly sure, but we have some suppositions. For starters, it is possible that he just had to consolidate his power. As I said earlier, he arrived to power young and from a different family branch, but even more than that, in some very strange circumstances. I mean, he was just supposed to be the regent, a temp worker. So he probably had to face a lot of defiance from the noble class, who just looked at him and thought, yo, who the fuck is that guy? Obviously exaggerating a bit here. He was still the grandchild of Sundiata Keita, so not a complete nobody. But you get my point. So to leave behind him for an entire year the country that he struggled to control, that would just be asking for a coup d'etat. And second, Musa wanted to make his pilgrimage special and spectacular. And this would require a lot of resources and a lot of planning. Looking at gold production, the Bure region is estimated to have produced about 4 tons of gold per year, and the Bambouk region about half a ton, which is a lot. It is estimated that on the pilgrimage, Musa would bring about 16 tons of gold. And so, he probably had to spend most of these 12 years just saving up gold for the trip. Shit, sun's going down already. No. This is gonna take a while. So that's the money side of things covered. Now let's talk slavery. Okay, so the history of slavery in West Africa, how it started, who was considered acceptable to be enslaved, and yes, it does sound horrifying. And yes, it is fucking horrible. But in case you didn't realize yet, the world fucking sucks, and we should all just go back to bed and play Pokemon. And even what being a slave meant for their rights and standards of living, that's a big topic. Way too big for me and my knowledge, but even way too big for this video, so I'm going to keep it simple. Most servants in Malian society were slaves, and the ones that would accompany Musa to Mecca would be no exception, arriving in Cairo with about 20,000 followers, but leaving Mali with much more, up to 60,000. Most of them, once again, slaves. Slaves built the pyramids. Slaves. But the thing about slaves is, you can't just mine them out of the ground, or make them grow in a tree in your backyard. Believe me, I've tried. You actually have to capture them from somewhere. And this somewhere for Mali was usually their pagan neighbor's land. The slaving campaigns and raids were extremely common, to the point that sometimes Mali was actually described as being in a state of eternal war. And to have enough slaves for the pilgrimage, they probably had to raid even more. Like what, you only enslaved 2,000 babies this year? But he probably also did it to expand the empire. I mean, he was still an emperor after all. So to conquer some small kingdom, to submit their people and to force them into paying you tributes, well, that's just part of the job, really. When Musa arrived in Cairo, he actually bragged about conquering 24 cities and their surrounding villages. So clearly this wasn't all just fun and slavery. But an entire decade of saving up gold and setting up military campaigns, that's a lot of work for just a pilgrimage. And the thing is, he didn't need to go so hard on this. Most people don't go so hard on this. His predecessors certainly didn't, so why would he want his pilgrimage to be so gigantic, so spectacular, so memorable? What was his end goal? Well, it's not like he wrote his exact motivations on a piece of paper, though that would have been nice, but we can at least make some guesses. First reason, legitimacy. As I said earlier, he arrived to power in some strange circumstances, so there is a very real chance that the local nobility looked at him like he was some sort of bum. But a lot of these nobles were now Muslims, so being able to pull off the greatest Hajj in the history of mankind, that would at least earn you some prestige in their eyes. The second reason might have been local influence. To submit and conquer some small kingdoms and cities and to incorporate them into your empire, that is done by strength. But to keep them inside your empire and to keep them peaceful, you need some soft power. So being seen as a powerful, just and religious leader would really help to keep them in check. This would help to stop them from rebelling, declaring independence, or even worse, unionizing. Third reason, international influence. Egypt was on the way to Mecca, so a stop-by was obviously planned. But this wasn't just any Egypt, because the country was then ruled by the Mamluks. Former slaves, now at the peak of their power, and the only international player that actually managed to make the Mongols eat their bows through their ass. Making a good impression on them could lead to some more commerce, but also, maybe, alliances. Fourth and final reason, Musa might have killed his mother. What? Oh sure, like you never did. Two important things to point out here. First, it seems that the world outside of Mali never even heard of such an event, so most of the sources that we have don't even touch on it. However, local Malian sources do remember that, and they also seem very confident in their claim, as can be read in the Tariq al-Fatash. And second, at least according to these claims, it was just an accident. No Game of Thrones shenanigans going on here. And also, bonus third point, most sources disagree on who this mother was. Some say that it was his mother, but some say it was his grandmother, and some others say it was his stepmother. But in any case, it was someone's mom, and she shared blood with him. And matricides, even accidental ones, are still very poorly seen by religion. And so, and according to local sources, the main reason why Musa went on the pilgrimage in the first place was to try and gain God's forgiveness and avoid going to hell. But with all of that done, and after 12 long years of work, of planning and of saving up gold, Musa could finally leave Mali to go on his pilgrimage in the year 1324. He started the crossing of the desert on horseback, with up to 60,000 servants with him, with some soldiers and court members in the mix. However, I do have to point out, 60,000 is a very high estimate. But we have shockingly few accounts of just how many people Musa left Mali with, so we do with what we have. And they quickly arrived to the absolute shithole that was known as Tuat, which was basically just a salt mine, only inhabited by slaves who were forced to work and live in horrendous conditions. The living conditions in Tuat were apparently so bad that during their very short stay, nearly half of the 60,000 Malians fell ill to some mysterious food disease. Now we don't know if the disease was just some sort of rash or just food cancer, or if they all just fell in the stairs while taking out the trash, like some sort of idiots. Don't judge me. But what we do know is that pretty much every single person that fell ill had to stop the pilgrimage immediately, basically cutting the entire group in half. Probably extremely annoyed, but still undeterred, Musa kept going with what was left of his group, going through some small towns, oases, and mostly deserts. And finally, after months of traveling in the desert, Musa and his group finally reached Egypt through Sudan and the city of Cairo on the 18th of July 1324. And after camping under the pyramids for a few days, they finally entered the city of Cairo and started marching in the street. There are many different accounts of this specific event from multiple sources, and they all have some small differences from one another. But they pretty much all agree on one thing. This little parade by complete foreigners in the streets of Cairo was fucking insane! At the head of the group were 500 heralds, all dressed in gorgeous Persian silk and carrying a big fat staff of pure gold. Then came a few hundred soldiers on horsebacks, each brandishing a spear or a banner, and then came Musa himself, riding a horse and basically dressed like a god, and surrounded by courtesans. And then came about 80 camels, each one of them carrying around 150 kilos of pure gold, and then came the rest of the group, tens of thousands of servants, all marching in perfect order and dressed magnificently. The exact number of people is extremely fuzzy. We know that a lot of people got left behind in Tuat, but when it comes to the number of people that actually reached Cairo, most sources agree to 15-20,000. Just imagine that you are a random Egyptian citizen that day. You get up, you drink your coffee, you kiss your wife good day, and then you go to work. But then, along the way, you just stumble onto a 2-kilometer long procession of some random foreigners that live thousands of kilometers away across the desert and that you barely even heard of in your life. Tens of thousands of people, large enough to be an invading army, except they're all dressed like pimps and they have so much gold on them that they shine brighter than the fucking sun. This event just shattered the mind of pretty much every single witness present that day. This raised a lot of attention, including from the Sultan. And at that point, things got a bit off the rails for Musa, because the Sultan al-Nasir obviously wanted to meet this foreigner who was making such a ruckus in his capital. So he summoned Musa to meet, talk, exchange some gifts, and maybe make some deals. Sounds pretty innocent, doesn't it? But, by custom, any visitor had to kiss the ground in front of the Sultan as a sign of respect and submission. And this would be humiliating for an emperor like Musa. This would be declaring himself as inferior to the Sultan. This would be submitting himself to a foreign ruler. And so Musa tried to avoid the meeting, dodging his messengers, saying that he's not here for long, leaving him on read, pretending to be sick, and for someone else, it might have worked. But he was a pimped up emperor, throwing gold everywhere with tens of thousands of people right in the Sultan's backyard. There is no way the Sultan could ignore him. And after some insisting, Musa broke and accepted to meet. And so Musa met the Sultan, who, straight away, told him to kiss the floor. There are basically three different accounts of the meeting. One, Musa just refuses to kiss the floor. The meeting goes on as usual and the Sultan still treats him with honor and respect, but as some sort of weird power play, he forbids Musa from sitting down for the entire meeting. 2. Musa also refuses, but justifies himself by saying that as a Muslim from the Malikite school, he only prostrates himself before God. The Sultan saw this as acceptable and the meeting went on normally. But that account is pretty unlikely because of the implications of this diplomatic sausage fight. The Sultan wanted Musa to kneel, to make himself appear stronger in his own court. Account number 3, Musa just proclaimed, "I prostrate myself before God," before kneeling, kissing the ground and just moving on. Musa could just pretend that he was being pious, and the Sultan could pretend that he had won the sausage fight and that Musa had submitted himself to him. It was basically a diplomatic compromise. And as for the rest of the meeting, it went decently well. Musa gave the Sultan 180 kilos of gold, and the Sultan gave Musa some of his own gift. Some camels, horses, some servants, some supplies, a palace. I got a calendar for Christmas. I need better friends. But one of the gifts of the Sultan was a Mamluk robe. A robe marked with the Sultan's symbol, meaning that Musa would have to walk around bearing the mark of another king. Considering all this, the robe, the tension at the meeting, the fact that the khutbah was delivered in the Sultan's name, which is some Islamic cultural thing that I don't understand very well, but apparently the khutbah is delivered in the name of the most important person present. So if the khutbah is delivered in the Sultan's name, that would mean that the Sultan is more important than Musa. I think. It is clear that the Sultan would honor Musa, but he would just never see him as his equal. What a dick! Musa ended up staying 3 months in Cairo, on the craziest shopping spree the world has ever seen. He and his followers just spent their entire time walking around markets, buying everything they saw at crazy stupid prices. They behaved like their money was inexhaustible and unlimited. But it was. Because when they saw some rich tourists just throwing money everywhere without thinking about it, Egyptian merchants just took advantage of it and raised their prices to the fucking moon. They sold them accessories and garments and clothing for 5 dinars when they were not even worth 1. They milked the Malians out of all the gold they could, scamming them on a daily basis. And some of them even bragged about it, to historians like Al-Umari. The Malians were just too trusting. Or naive. The choice is yours. Because they just thought that the Egyptian merchants would actually practice the Islamic rules of trade and honor they were preaching. And when all was said and done, when Musa had barely any gold left to put on his camels, and the Egyptians were just so full of it that their entire gold economy crashed, while the Malians would end up forming a very poor opinion of Egyptians, which would last for centuries. Musa would then leave Cairo for Mecca a few months later alongside an Egyptian caravan. He would then arrive at Mecca, where he would accomplish the duties of his pilgrimage. He visited the tomb of the Prophet and his companions, and he gave a lot of wealth to Mecca's inhabitants, being very open and generous. He would actually stay in Mecca for a bit, to visit some local scholars, artists, poets, merchants, artisans, and he would offer them a fuck ton of gold to follow him back to Mali. An offer that some of them would actually take. And after all of this, his ultimate goal finally accomplished, it was time for Musa to go back home. The caravan returned to Cairo on the 11th of January 1325, but Musa and his group were not with them. Apparently the Malians and Egyptians left Mecca together, but Musa and his people got separated from the caravan. We don't know if it was intentional or accidental, but whatever the case, this little escapade was a fucking catastrophe. They didn't know the route or the land, they had no village or drinkable water in sight, they were completely lost. They apparently ended up just marching towards the horizon until they reached Suez. And what a march that was! They ran out of food, they were dying of cold, and they had to do all that, marching in a land they didn't know, dying of heat during the day and cold during the night, with barely any food or water, while being harassed by local Bedouins, nomads, who just harassed them all the way, raiding them frequently, targeting the elderly and the sick, the people too weak to keep up with the rest of the pack, like some baby buffalo on BBC Earth, only for the Bedouins to attack them, capture them, and then sell them into slavery. Again, they were mostly slaves already, but still, to the point that when Musa finally arrived back to Cairo, he was almost too low on men and camels to make the trip back home, but even more than that, he was almost out of gold. As I said earlier, Musa and his people spent their money recklessly during their first trip in Cairo, like their gold was inexhaustible. But it wasn't. And after spending so much gold in Cairo and in Mecca, after donating so much wealth to people in need or just people he wanted to please, after losing so many resources during his return trip, Musa was now out of cash. And at this point his last option to go back home was to borrow from loaners with extortionate interest rates. Yeah, Egyptian businessmen were dicks to them when they still had money, they were not going to stop when they had none. So when Musa came to them to borrow, they would give him the money. But the rates were criminal. For every 300 dinars borrowed, he would have to pay back 700. And yeah, if you're American, it probably just reminds you of that student loan you still haven't paid back, but for the rest of the civilized world, this is messed up. And on top of all that, he still had to sell some of the souvenirs he bought during his first stay in Cairo. For half the value! I swear these merchants were running out of swimming pool to put their new money in. And so, after all of this, it was finally time for Musa to go back home. Out of the possible 60,000 people that left Mali with him, though once again, 60,000 is a very high estimate, but most sources only talk about how many people he actually reached Cairo with, Al-Makrizi claims that only a third of these people came back home with him. Some of them got foot cancer in Tuat, some of them got captured on the return from Mecca, and some of them probably just died along the way. But on his way back home, Musa made a detour, because while Musa was busy buying souvenirs, his generals were busy conquering cities. And so Musa decided to just stop by one of his newly acquired pieces of land, the proud city of Gao. Which was quite an accomplishment, because at that point, Gao was probably the last great trading city of the Sahel outside of the empire. And by conquering it, not only did Musa and the empire gain a near total monopoly on the Sahara trade, they actually managed to unify the Senegal, Gambia and Niger river basins, three regions that were always kinda close culturally and religiously, but never unified under one empire. This would mark the pinnacle of Malian expansion, and what most people consider to be the golden age of the Mali Empire. And at that point, his pilgrimage and its political implications became very important, because Gao was majority Muslim. So his newly acquired religious aura gave him some religious leadership that would make holding this city much easier. He then built a new mosque in the city, just to really get that point across, and then he would just march onto the small town of Timbuktu to conquer it. And while Musa would build a lot of mosques in a lot of different cities, it appears that Timbuktu became his personal favorite. There he would build the great mosque of Djingaribert, some madrasas, a palace, the University of Sankor, even more mosques, staffing every one of them with the scholars he brought from Mecca. He built so many different buildings in the city to spread Islam and knowledge and money that Timbuktu would soon explode, from a tiny footnote, just a small village that nobody knew, to the greatest and most respected city in the entire Sahel, the trading hub of the Sahara, one of the beacons of Islamic teachings in the world, the crown jewel of Musa's finally completed empire, acknowledged by the rest of the world, reigning over the 3 rivers, the desert trade, the gold mines, and between 40 to 50 million people. It's going to get very bad from here though, because the empire will soon collapse on itself, most cities are going to just break away to start forming their own kingdoms, and the Mali Empire is going to lose most of its territory. But still, looks nice. And after accomplishing all of this, Musa would finally pass away. But we're not really sure when. Again, conflicting sources. So the most commonly accepted year of death is 1337, so about 12 to 13 years after his pilgrimage. Some people say it was even earlier in 1332, but I have no idea. And this, ladies and gentlemen, was the life of Mansa Musa, the greatest Mansa in the history of Mali, the richest man in the history of mankind, the hero behind the greatest pilgrimage in the history of the world. And at that point, you might be looking at the YouTube progress bar down there and wondering to yourself, hey, how are we only halfway through this? Why? Do I still have that many questions about him? I spent my afternoon on this. Sun's gone down. Do I still have that many questions about him? Well, yes, a few. Dozens. So we have a lot to talk about now, so let's start with the most important question of all. Did you like the video and subscribe to the channel? Probably not, but if you did, it would make me very, very happy. And maybe you too, but mostly me. Now back to Musa, and back to the question we started the video with, and the question everybody has when they talk about Musa. Just how rich was he? Well, that is a very difficult question, and there are no definitive...
400 billions!
Who are you?
I'm you, but from a different perspective.
What do you mean you're me? You look nothing like me, we're completely different. You're not even bald.
Oh my fucking god.
Yes. So back to Musa, I googled his net worth and it says 400 billions pretty much everywhere. So I'm guessing this is the answer. Yeah, okay. So 400 billions, this number. Mansa Musa had a net worth of $400 billion. That is the number you see everywhere, whether it's on some random internet blogs or big name publications. This seems to be a number everyone agrees on, and the thing is, when you look at these articles and you check their source, the source for this number is always the same: celebritynetworth.com. A website with a piggy bank as a logo, so obviously they must be experts about money. Back in 2010, they released an article titled "The Richest People of All Time, Inflation Adjusted," a list of the 25 richest people of all time, at least according to them. This article has since been removed and replaced by a newer version of the article, but on the same link, with the newer version coming from 2014. Even though they clearly milked the cow until dust came out of its teats with the amount of other articles they made about this exact same topic. And there you have it. 400 billions. That's the number. Job is done, ladies and gentlemen. We got them, mission accomplished. We are the absolute best. But where did they get that number from? I mean, everyone got 400 billions from Celebrity Net Worth. But where did Celebrity Net Worth get 400 billions from? What are their sources? Well, they say that to make these calculations, they used a combination of basic inflation calculations, the relative purchasing power of wealth to GDP over time, and finally the historical value of two primary assets, gold and land. Great, but can we see your data? Data that no other historian in the world has access to? Their GDP, the inflation year after year in the Mali Empire, the exact production of their gold and salt mines, how much land did they own, and how much did they actually control. All of this data, and your calculations too, not just the basic ones, but also the complex ones, that would be useful. Can we see all that? No. Of course not. They do not give us any of that, they just tell us they made the calculations, they give us a few lines to tell us that yes, indeed, the man was very, very rich, and that's it. That's not good enough. This is all they give us, that is not good enough. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. Yeah, but not all publications that make these kinds of lists publish all the details of their calculations. I mean, just look at Forbes' list of the 25 richest people in the world, for example. I'm sorry, are you actually comparing Forbes with celebrity net worth? Yeah, why not? I mean, sure, yeah, the name is dumb, but they have a piggy bank as a logo. That has to count for something, right? And they must be a somewhat serious company. Look, they have articles about Rihanna's new apartment, Formula 1 fixed racing, Nicolas Cage. They're full of shit and you know it. Yeah, I do. And you mentioned Forbes, but they have a lot more data to make their list about today's current billionaires compared to the amount of data we have about a foreign emperor 700 years ago in the countries that we know quite little about. And second, they still get criticized for these articles. A lot! They have that much more data about their topic, and yet the numbers they give are still estimates, because they cannot do much more than that. And so, if calculating the wealth of the richest people today with the amount of data we have on them is still that unprecise, then calculating the wealth of Mansa Musa 700 years ago across the fucking Sahara, it's ridiculous, it's impossible, we can't do that. Okay, but hear me out. What if every journalist and writer at Celebrity Net Worth were unrecognized geniuses? I mean, the calculations are not shown, but the result might still be correct, right? Oh, I'm not so sure about that. Back to the article. Yes, that article, that one. Yeah. Can you read the title for me, really quick? The richest people of all time, inflation adjusted? Nice. Once again, can you repeat the last two words of this title? Inflation adjusted? Right. This article, from 2014, 10 years ago, had Mansa Musa at $400 billion inflation adjusted. And now this refreshed version of the article from 2019, also adjusted for inflation, has Mansa Musa's net worth at 400 billions. This new article from March 2024, this year, last month, a full fucking decade after the original article, still has Mansa Musa's net worth at 400 billions. What countries do you guys live in that you had no inflation whatsoever in the past decade? No inflation in the past 2 fucking years. And as I said, they removed the original 2010 version of the article. But this is the internet, and nothing on the internet is ever lost. Not even the shitty Naruto fanfiction I made when I was 12. And so I could use the Wayback Machine to find a 2012 version of this article, and look! 400 billions! Again! Hi, just a quick little edit. What I just said about everything on the internet being there forever used to be true, but the Wayback Machine just got sued and lost, meaning that a lot of things are lost forever, including the original article I was talking about. However, you can still find some other articles from other websites still mentioning and referencing this original article. Just 2 minutes into a random online inflation calculator, and we can see that $400 billion in 2012 is equivalent to $540 billion in 2024. Now, 2 things. First, the economy is fucked, the planet is burning, and we are all going to die. But second, that is $140 billion of increase. That is one entire Warren Buffett. That is a bonus Bill Gates. And they're telling me that Musa's net worth hasn't changed one bit in a decade? No! This is bullshit! Nothing about this number holds up. And yet, everyone keeps using it as a source. Everyone. Fucking everyone. I have no idea how it got so widespread in the first place. Sky History, The Independent, the BBC. I have seen papers, actual published research papers from a conference at a university and published on a platform called ResearchGate, which sounds pretty fucking ironic right now, that actually not only use the 400 billion number, but actually quote celebrity net worth as their source. How? How do you look at this website with this article about Beyonce's sports car and think to yourself, yeah, good enough for me? I mean, surely those guys are experts about Mali's medieval history. Okay, stop. Breathe. Calm down. You made your point. The number makes no sense. We all get it now. But if that number is wrong, then just how much money did he have? Well, see, that's the thing. We don't know. But even more than that, we can't know. Let's look at it a bit closer. Mali's main source of revenue was gold. Mali's gold mines were some of the biggest producers in the world back then. They were mostly located in two regions, Bouré and Bambouk. Both of them controlled by Mali. And maybe also Lobby, but we're not really sure just how much influence Mali had on them. And as I said earlier in the video, we have actual estimates of their gold production. 4 tons per year for Bouré, 4.5 for Bambouk, and 0.2 for Lobby. Not exactly 5, you can't see well, but almost 5. But a few issues here. First of all, these numbers come from the document titled Tableau géographique de l'Ouest africain au Moyen Âge by Raymond Mauny? But all I could find about this were just reviews of the paper, but not the paper itself. About that, I just found a copy you can actually buy online. It cost about 350 euros. So, as I said, I could not find it. But also, these numbers are still estimates, approximations, so you should be careful about them. But that's not even the biggest issue here, because problem number 2, Musa didn't exactly own those mines. Say what? Well, it's a bit messy, but basically, it was actually the locals who worked and operated the mine, and they would then give the gold to Musa as tribute. Now you might wonder why not just attack, invade, take control of the mines. But the thing is, his predecessors already tried that. They enforced greater control on the mines and started working them directly, but for some reason, they dried out. The mines dried out. They stopped giving gold. And for some other reasons, some new mines just popped open right next to it, outside of their control, but overflowing with gold. They apparently tried that multiple times. They would capture the new mines that was overflowing with gold, but it would soon dry out and a new one would pop up. They would capture the new one, which would again dry out, and then a new one would pop up again, shitting gold everywhere. So instead of just playing this rich people whack-a-mole for eternity, they just gave control to the locals and taxed them hard. What do you mean the mines dried out? And what, the mines just start giving gold again the second the emperor leaves? How does that work? Well, we're not really sure about that, but one of the most common theories about it is that finding gold in the area and actually taking it out of the ground requires excellent knowledge of the area, but also a very special skill set. Because Bouré and Bambouk were not gold mines, they were gold fields. Huge gold fields. And they had some bits of gold just scattered everywhere in the area. Now the gold is pretty close to the surface, meaning that the mines were, and still are, pretty easy to exploit, meaning that they are much more productive. Which also explains why the mines were making so much gold back then, but still, in such a large area, finding the gold in the dirt, knowing where to put your mine and how to work the mine, required a lot of skills that the locals had, but the emperors probably did not. Another pretty common theory is that the locals were actually leprechauns. Successive emperors tried to find their gold under the rainbow, but after multiple failures they just decided to tax the Irish. Yeah, but Ireland is a tax haven. Everyone knows that. That is a dumb theory. You're right, fuck Ireland. You guys deserve the frog sand. Tax havens aside, Musa not having direct control of the mines is a big deal, for two reasons. First, this information comes from Musa directly during his visit to Cairo. But he also said a few weeks later that gold grew like carrots in his country, so you should take everything the man says with a bit of salt sprinkled on top of it. But also, him coming out of nowhere and just saying, I don't actually control what makes me so fucking rich, that's pretty much the exact opposite of a brag. So I just couldn't find any reason why he would lie about it. And the second reason why this is such a big deal is because even if we have some rough estimates of the output of the gold mines, we don't know how much of that gold actually goes to Musa. We also don't know how much value gold had in the empire. How much bread you could buy for 10 grams of gold, for example. I mean, Mali had a reputation of basically drowning in gold, so maybe not as much as you'd think. And also, gold was Mali's #1 export, by far, but it was not the only one. Salt and slaves, for example. Plus Mali's strategic position between a resource-rich south with ivory and more slaves and more gold, and the north of Africa, which was basically starving for trade. This gave Mali a near monopoly on trade in the Sahara, which allowed them to just impose their tariffs at will. But we don't know what those tariffs were. And we also don't know just how much salt and slaves they sold, and all of this can be very frustrating. We have enough knowledge about both Musa and Mali to know that they were unbelievably rich, but we also don't have enough knowledge to know just how rich. And so, was Mansa Musa truly the richest man in the history of humanity? Well, I don't know. And honestly, I don't even know if he was the richest Mansa in the history of Mali. What did you just say? I know. It sounds like blasphemy to even suggest something like this. I know that. But I mean, Mansa Suleiman came to power just 4 years after Musa's passing. The empire was still pretty much the same. And unlike Musa, he did not spend all of his gold in Egypt on a tourist shopping spree, which might also explain why we don't talk about Suleiman that much nowadays. Now, as to know if Musa was the richest or just extremely rich, at the very least, he was extremely rich, that's for sure. And this might be a bit of an unpopular opinion here, but I genuinely believe that when you are at this level of wealth, you really don't care about trying to quantify your wealth with something as simplistic as a number. And so with that question answered, your only answer was that you didn't know. We can now move on to other legends about Musa's life. Now you might remember, but earlier in the video I said that the Egyptians were so full of gold that their economy crashed. But I did not elaborate on that, on purpose. Some of you might have yelled at your screen because of it. This was a reference to the famous story of Musa spending just so much gold in Cairo all at once that he actually managed to crash the gold rate in the city for at least a decade. A story that is even more widespread than the 400 billion number from earlier. And for good reasons, because this time we have actual sources talking about it. Ibn Kathir explains that the rate of gold fell by 2 dirhams for each mitkol. Now mitkol sounds like the name of an elf in Lord of the Ring, but really it's just a measuring unit. And Al-Umari agrees with Ibn Kathir, saying that while gold never sold for more than 25 dirhams before Musa's visit, it never sold for more than 22 after his visit. Okay, but if we have actual sources about it, why are you still complaining? Well, my lovely bold friend, it's because this time we can actually verify those claims. Now obviously you should never completely trust any sources whatsoever because they might either be wrong or just plain lying, but when you've got nothing else to work with, well, you deal with what you got, which can be a somewhat frustrating and inaccurate endeavor. But if we do have multiple sources and we can actually compare them, like in this situation, well, let's. So I was looking through an exchange rate table between gold and silver in Cairo under the Mamluk dynasty in the 14th century. You know, for fun. This video is a cry for help. And I came across this. This table regroups the exchange rate for gold in Cairo from all of the available sources at different points in time. A few things to point out here. First, we have gaping holes at multiple points in the table. But, I mean, we can't just invent sources, right? Right. And second, some of these are the declared exchange rate. Basically, it just means that the Sultan didn't like that his gold was worth like, I don't know, 1 dinar per kilo for example, and instead tried to force every single merchant in the city to accept 100 dinar per kilo as a gold rate exchange, to try and make his own gold more valuable. But just because the Sultan wanted it like that, that doesn't mean that the rate was actually enforced by Egyptian merchants. So some of the rates we are going to see might just be posturing. And third, the dates on this table are from the Muslim calendar. So Musa's arrival in Cairo in our calendar is 1324, but in this calendar it's 724. And with all of that out of the way, we can look at the table. One thing you can see right away is that a rate of 20 to 1 is by far the most common rate, even before Musa's visit, and that's according to a lot of different sources. So Al-Umari's claim that gold never sold for less than 25 to 1 before Musa's visit, well, that was a goddamn lie. However, Al-Umari also claimed that the gold rate would not recover for another 12 years, but 12 years after 724 would be 736. Looking right before and after Musa's visit, you can see some gaping holes in the source, which is extremely annoying. But even if we don't have that many, we do have some sources before 736, claiming that, once again, the rate was a stable 20 to 1. So clearly, gold depreciation in Cairo didn't last 12 years like Al-Umari described. You're 042 right now, Al.
I'm sorry, Dave.
My name is Antoine. But okay, he got the rates wrong and he clearly exaggerated just how long the effect of the collapse would last. But I'm getting a bit suspicious here. Did the rates even go down at all? Well, we can just look at the year 724 and... yeah, okay, he at least got that one right. 4 different sources seem to corroborate with him. Okay, so it did happen. That's great. Yes. And now just one question remains. Just how bad was the dip? Well, Al-Umari claims that it went from 25 to 1 down to 20 to 1. I am a bit suspicious of that 25 to 1 right there because we have no records of the rate going higher than 20 to 1 for the previous 25 years. But we don't have accounts for the years 719 to 723, so who knows, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And since the other sources don't give any base amount at all, just the loss, we'll use the 25 to 1 rate for now. So, according to these different sources, the rate of gold fell by at least 12%, 8%, 24%, no data. Okay, so the percentage and the amount vary a lot, but it is definitely a noticeable amount. However, and this is going to be a completely personal opinion here, so feel free to just disregard me, I already have. But even by taking the worst account here, 25% decrease, it is bad, but like, not that bad? Now don't take me wrong, it's bad. Some people probably got ruined over this, and I know I wouldn't want to lose 24% of my money, but it's not the complete and total economic collapse I was sold on. I mean, by reading some accounts about it online, I expected it to be at least 50%, cut it in half. Yeah, but Al-Umari never talked about complete collapse. That's just the impression you got from reading some over-sensationalized articles. And also, don't take it the wrong way, man, but you really suck at money. You even bought Boeing stock 5 years ago, for Christ's sake. Yeah, fine, maybe you're right, and I just underestimate how bad it was on the moment. But if you just look at the very next year, right after Musa's departure in the table, the rate had apparently already gone back up to 25 to 1, meaning that first, it had already gone back up, but second, something else made it drop down to 20-1 again. Meaning that these kinds of fluctuations could happen even without Musa's intervention. For example, it appears that this time the fall was triggered by the Mamluks deciding to sell all of their jewels all at once. Even though I don't know why they would do that. Okay, so the rate of gold recovered the very next year, but maybe that's also thanks to Musa? I mean, you said earlier that Musa was out of cash when he returned to Cairo, and that he had to sell some of his stuff for gold and borrow even more gold to make it back to his country. And so maybe taking away that much gold from circulation helped to relieve the economy. And so Musa would have crashed the economy, and then when he came back, brought it back up. Okay, good point. Maybe. But that's still speculation. But maybe. So yeah, to wrap up this point, Musa did crash down the gold rate in Cairo. However, it wasn't as severe as a lot of people make it out to be, and did not last as long as a lot of sources claim it did, in my opinion. And now moving on to another contentious point with another sketchy source, the boat guy. Very early on into the video, I talked about Musa's predecessor, Mohammed ibn Q, who was apparently obsessed with the idea of crossing the Atlantic. He sent a first fleet over there, but when it did not come back, he took the lead of a second fleet, crossed the ocean with them, never to return. And Musa, who was initially just the regent, stepped up, took the crown and became Mansa. That's a pretty nice story, but it has a few problems. There are basically two holes in the story, the regency and the boats. Let's start with that one. There is very, very little chance that such a risky, costly and ambitious expedition would be attempted at all with Malian boat technology. What? You really think Africans can't use boats? Or some of them can, for sure. The Swahili on the east coast were expert seamen. Seamen? Stop it. But the Malians were not sea people. They were desert and river people. Their populations and cultures revolve around rivers. The Senegal, Gambia and Niger rivers specifically. In fact, the Ghana Empire, which is usually considered to be the predecessor of the Mali Empire, did not even reach the ocean, not even close. At that point, the Malians had only just reached the Atlantic, and it was still very far from the heart of their empire. And even more than that, the technology and skills required to navigate on a river and on the ocean are vastly different. I mean, you would not expect the Swiss to be expert sailors, right? So for them to attempt something that insane, that difficult, with the emperor on board, and by spending so many resources, risking so many lives, when they have that little seafaring experience, there is always a possibility that it did happen. But it's a small one. And now for the second problem, why would Q leave the empire behind him with Musa as a regent? Dude, that was just a regency. He was leaving the country for a while, and so he just chose someone to take care of it while he was gone. That kind of things happened all the time all around the world back then. Yes, but why Musa specifically? I mean, as I said earlier, he was described as young when he visited Cairo, and he became regent at least 12 years before that. He might have just turned 18 at that point, and he was probably not an experienced politician. Maybe not a statesman, but they were from the same family. Q probably trusted a family member much more to be loyal to him than just a random politician. Musa was from Q's family, sure, they were both descendants of Sundiata Keita, but they were not close relatives. They were both from different branches of the family. Q probably had a few closer relatives to choose from, so for him to pass power to this different branch of the family, that's a bit odd to say the least. And the thing about that point is, it gets weirder and weirder the more you think about it, regardless of circumstances. Does not matter if the boat story is true or not. Because for Musa to get on the throne, even just as a regent, when he was so young and from a different part of the family, that is weird. There had to have been better heirs to choose from. Okay, stop, you are going a bit too far here. Alumari only exaggerated the gold exchange story, he did not completely make it up, why would anyone want to invent this boat story? Who are the sources? Well, that's the thing. We don't have sources. We have one source. Just one. The one and only person of this entire time period to even just mention the gigantic and epic voyage of Musa's predecessor was Musa himself. Not a single local Malian source even mentions such a fantastic trip of epic proportions, which is weird, because we are talking hundreds of ships just disappearing. We are talking about the potential death of an emperor. This would have had to leave a mark somewhere on their culture or on their lore, right? And the only foreign source to even mention it is the one quoting Musa directly when he was talking about it in Cairo. Huh. So the only person to ever mention the emperor just disappearing and leaving all of his power to the regent would be the regent himself. That's convenient. Are you implying what I think you are implying? What I am implying would explain how he reached the throne so young, even though he came from a different branch of the family, why his predecessor would just disappear without a trace. What are you implying, man? You're scaring me. What I am implying is that Muhammad ibn Q didn't just disappear while trying to cross the ocean, that Musa didn't become Mansa simply by being conveniently named regent. What I am implying is that Musa became emperor by a coup. And this would actually explain so many other things. Now, you might remember earlier when I said that Musa took about 12 years to start his pilgrimage. There are many reasons why, one of them being that obviously it took time to accumulate enough gold and slaves to do so. But another reason was that as a young, unexperienced and non-direct heir to the throne, his legitimacy in the empire might have been severely lacking. And so he needed to seriously secure his position as a Mansa if he wanted to be able to leave the country for his pilgrimage without getting deposed immediately, and securing his power took time. And this makes even more sense if you take into consideration the fact that he might have been a usurper, someone who took the throne by force and would therefore be seen as illegitimate by pretty much everyone. And in fact, even his pilgrimage makes more sense like this. Because one of the main reasons why he went on the pilgrimage in the first place, but also why he tried so hard to make it so spectacular, was to try and gain some religious leadership. Performing the pilgrimage would make him look like a much better prospect ruler for Muslims, which were a large part of the Malian elite. It would just make him more legitimate to rule over them. And if the local Malian elite contested his power because of a potential throne takeover, then this religious leadership becomes even more important for Musa to keep control of his empire. It would even explain why Musa would be the only person to ever talk about the boat story. Because it never happened, so why would anyone even talk about it? This whole story would just be a cover-up to try and hide what actually happened to his predecessor, while also trying to justify how someone so young and unexpected came to power in the first place. Musa told this story in Cairo, to people he wanted to impress, people he wanted to have a good impression of him. But even more important than that, to people who did not know shit about Mali. They had no idea what was going on down there, and that allowed him to just say whatever he wanted, because they would never find out the truth no matter what, and so they would have to rely on the information he gave them. Okay, stop. I mean, a lot of it makes sense, but you are not bringing anything new to the table here. You are just taking established facts and just spinning them differently to fit your narrative as you want. Well, you're right about that. None of the facts I'm giving you right now are even new. These are all well-known pieces of information that I already gave you earlier, and none of them are definitive proof that Musa took power by force. However, they are not proof, they are clues. Some pieces of information that, if you regroup together and look at with this new lens, gives new meanings to things we already knew and provides actual explanations about things that we did not even understand. And when you look at history with the idea that Musa was a usurper, things make so much more sense than with Musa simply being a regent that got lucky. It explains how he got to power and why he most likely lied about the boat guy. It provides additional information as to why it took him so long to go to Mecca and why he needed to go in the first place. And to finish it off, I do actually have some new and fresh information that I didn't tell you about yet. I'm guessing it will be a clue again and not a proof. Correct. When did this video turn into a Cluedo escape game? Some sources indicate that when he was a child, Musa received a gift from foreign merchants of 7 meat-coals. And when he would grow up, he would actually repay that debt sevenfold. That's it? He was just given some money? That is a pretty useless information. At face value, yes, but not if you start digging. Because when you think about it, why would anyone give Musa any gift at that point? He was a child, and he was not even an heir. He had no power. He was a nobody on the political stage at that point. Because they were kind and nice. Really? That's your best explanation? Yes! Just because he is a child, that does not mean you can't give him anything. Santa Claus came to see me every year. Well, maybe. Yes, maybe you're right, and maybe the merchants were just being generous and kind. I mean, some humans are capable of doing that. Not me, but some. So, yes, that is a possibility. But maybe we should put the tinfoil hat back on. And if you look at this gift with the usurper lens back on, what you might see is that this gift might just be an attempt by foreign merchants to wage into Mali's internal political affairs. Because it is very unlikely that Musa got to keep the money. It most likely just went to his family instead. His close family. His family branch. I mean, if you ever were to win the Euro Million when you were 5, your parents would probably just buy you a Lego Star Wars set and then spend the rest on a new house in Hawaii. And the merchants knew that. Giving money to Musa meant giving money to his family branch. This gift would therefore serve 2 purposes. The first one would be to create good relations with this family branch, maybe in anticipation of a change of emperor. Musa got the crown young, so it is very likely that this coup d'etat had been cooking for a while. And so the foreign merchants just purchased good relationships with the challengers, basically betting on their win. And second, as a roundabout way to vote for their favorite candidate for the crown. In the family branch, there were probably quite a few candidates for the crown, so giving money to Musa specifically would basically indicate your preference for him, and possibly influence the outcome of whoever would become emperor next. That's pretty much what we call lobbying today. As trade in the Sahara exploded, the number of foreign merchants doing business in Mali exploded too, so it is very likely that at least some of them tried to gain power in Mali the civilized way. With bribes. Okay, stop! No! You are reaching way too far on this. You are just taking random unrelated facts and twisting them to fit your narrative. There might be dozens of possible explanations for all of this. I see what you mean. And you are right. I do not have any proof whatsoever that this theory is the correct one. However, the fact remains that if you just dismiss this theory, Musa's arrival to power is still strange, that the boat story makes little to no sense. If you dismiss this theory, you still have to explain these holes in the story. This theory is not guaranteed, by any means. But it does make a lot of sense, at least to me. But also to some actual historians. People who have studied Mali for decades and who know the topic much better than just me, a random guy on the internet. However, some other historians just disagree, and there are other theories trying to fill the gaps. Now you might remember that earlier I said that Musa was the only person to ever mention a failed boat trip across the Atlantic. However, we do have some sources, like, again, Alumari, who do mention a failed Malian boat trip to Morocco. You sneaky little sausage, you chose to hide it on purpose! Yes, mostly for dramatic effect. This expedition was apparently a commercial venture to try and open new trade routes across the sea, So this was not just a fun cruise filled with slides and cougars and casinos, this was serious business. And this certainly was not just a crazy attempt to find America. And this expedition was apparently a failure, with the boats being just thrown south by the elements. One of these angry elements might have been the Canary Current, a powerful oceanic flow going south, which might just actually be that powerful oceanic river Musa was talking about in his boat story. Oh my god, I like it so much better than your complotist theory. Musa exaggerated the boat story, sure, but it did happen. So they tried to go to Morocco with the emperor on board, they failed, and so Musa became the new emperor. That story is not as far-fetched as the usurper theory, that's for sure, but it also explains a lot less. It does not explain why Musa was selected as a regent, and it certainly does not explain why he lied to people in his boat story. I mean, why would he tell people that they tried to cross the ocean when they were just trying to reach Morocco? These holes in the story might have other explanations, but the reality is that we will probably never know what truly happened. Sources about this topic are scarce, and no, sources about all of medieval Mali are scarce and unreliable. They can be exaggerated, open to interpretation, just plain false, and sometimes just true, but so outlandish we're never going to believe them. And depending on which historian you're asking, they might see the whole thing very differently. For example, there is a story floating around about Musa during his pilgrimage, saying that he built a new mosque every single Friday, no matter which city or even town he was staying in. Most historians just reject that story. They think it was just a myth trying to express Musa's piety, and I would agree with that. However, some historians actually do believe that this story is true. That he did not build a new mosque every Friday, but that he paid for the construction of a new mosque every Friday, by giving the necessary money to whichever town he was in. And given Musa's history of, being very rich with a very loose wallet, it does make sense. And in fact, some people go even further than that, by saying that Musa did, in fact, build a new mosque every Friday. That when he traveled around, he was carrying some prefabricated mosque pieces, and that every Friday his servants just assembled the pieces, IKEA style, to have a mosque to pray in. I mean, that is the dumbest story I ever heard, but that's Mansa Musa we're talking about here. He is known for being very extravagant. Or he was a showman for sure, but it does really seem that because of his reputation, people will just believe any outlandish story they hear about him. The $400 billion story from earlier, which turned out to be bullshit, the gold crash in Cairo, which turned out to be true but exaggerated. These stories really don't hold up to close examination, but we still see them everywhere. And even when they are false or exaggerated, these stories still prop up his reputation. Reputation which is then used to justify even more outlandish claims. Like, oh, look, they say that he built a new mosque every Friday by assembling some mosque Legos. Well, that is extremely unbelievable. But once again, this is Mansa Musa we're talking about. This man crashed the entire Egyptian gold economy by himself. So if there is one guy who could do that, it would be him. And because of all that, it becomes so much harder to just form a picture of Musa and his time in power. Why? What is it about Musa that makes people just believe everything they hear about him? Why is it that when we bring up the Mali Empire, we only ever talk about Musa, even though that empire lasted centuries? Well, I'm pretty sure most of you guessed it by now. It was the pilgrimage. Well, I mean, yeah, it was a pretty big thing, but it was just one event, and from what you said earlier, it did not even go that well. It wasn't just a pretty big thing. I have been very analytical and critical in this video, so I'm a bit worried that I didn't do this moment justice, so I'm going to do it now. Musa's pilgrimage changed the world. Period. It defined what sub-Saharan Africa was for the rest of the planet. Pretty much no one in Europe had even heard of Mali back then. Even in the Middle East, they were just considered to be this faraway kingdom across the desert, like any other. No one cared about Mali. And Musa changed all that. He just showed up at their house, flexed his money and power like no one in the world had ever flexed, and then he just left, never to return. No one had ever seen anything like this before. This pilgrimage was just so mind-blowing that it managed to cross countries and continents and even time itself to reach us today. This event would be immortalized in the writings of dozens of historians and in the collective consciousness of the entire world, literally putting Mali on the map, but even more than that, making it synonymous with Mansa Musa. Here is Mali, for example, represented in the 1375 Catalan Atlas made by some Spanish historians. And right here you can see Musa, holding a big-ass gold nugget, representing the wealth of his country. Or in this map, by Angelino Dulce. I mean, sure, the map is ugly as hell, and yes, I'm pretty sure that is supposed to be a fucked up ostrich, but here is Mali, once again represented by Musa. For most of the world, Mansa Musa is Mali. It does not matter if Suleiman might have ruled at a more stable, prosperous time, and it does not matter if some of the stories about Musa have holes in them, if the sources disagree with one another, and if some of the rumors about Musa can just be proven false. And it doesn't even matter that Musa came back from Cairo to Mecca completely broke, that he actually had to sell back most of the stuff he bought and even borrow some more money to make it back to Mali. No one ever talks about it because the show of force was just so astounding that it completely overshadows everything else. For observers, Musa's reign had to be Mali's golden age, because how could we possibly imagine it being better than what he showed us in Cairo? We can't imagine a Mansa being greater than Musa. We can't even imagine someone ever being richer than Musa, because how could we? And the thing is, it was all on purpose from Musa. The pilgrimage was a piece of propaganda from the start. Musa planned this trip for 12 years to make it that big, because he wanted to impress, to be remembered, he wanted to leave his mark on the world. And it worked. It worked! His name is still remembered to this day as one of, if not the greatest name in African history. His legends still live into the minds of millions of people reading his story. And here I am, 700 years later, making a 10-hour video about him. And here you are, watching it. Musa won. He just won. And we are all just living in his shadow now. Oh, good God. I just finished shooting the video. Oh, I just spent the entire day on it. Oh! I'm not gonna lie, I don't even know what to say at this point. Thank you so much for watching the video up to this point. I don't know how long it will actually be when I finally edit it. Just know it was at least 10 hours for me. If you want to see me make more videos about some niche pieces of history in the future, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I don't know when I will make the next video. Okay? It took me like 2 months to research and write this one. If you have any advice about how to make videos better in the future, like video quality, sound, lighting, my face, I don't know, please feel free to give me your advice. I really need it, I'm just a beginner. Please just keep in mind that this video was shot on a phone and a Blue Yeti, so I don't have that much money to buy new equipment. If you have any questions or even suggestions of stories to make in the future, please just comment them down below. Now, when it comes to sources, everything will be down in the description, but the main one was this one. If you have any interest into digging up further about the Mali Empire or even the Songhai and Ghana Empire, it's a pretty good start. Once again, I want to thank every single one of you for watching this video, and I wish you a very good day. Ciao!